Lies of P. It's like Dark Souls, but with significantly fewer souls and many more soulless puppets. Debatably soulless puppets, the story is based around Mr. I Want to Be a Real Boy Pinocchio himself, with Geppetto, Jiminy Cricket, a blue fairy godmother, and an angry robotic parade master with a cage full of corpses on his back that tries to bludgeon you to death with a giant metal stick. Okay, a few creative liberties have been taken with the story, but given that one of them is that Pinocchio has a massive greatsword now, I'm not complaining. Quick heads up, this video will contain all the spoilers, as I'll be summarizing my entire playthrough of the game, so if you want to play it blind, I highly recommend you turn this video off right now and go play it yourself. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing I did upon waking up was to instantly use the item that kills you, so no deathless run. Shocking, I know. The second was to pick up a massive sword, and you know what that means, combat. Lies of P plays like a mix of several of the Souls games, with the committal animations and stamina usage of Dark Souls, the aggression-based healing system from Bloodborne, and an intuitive parry that can stun an enemy from Sekiro. There are a few unique additions though. Your healing resource, Pulse Cells, can recharge after being used up if you deal enough damage, further encouraging offensive last stand behavior, and the parry can outbreak enemy weapons if you landed enough. Speaking of enemies, the big baddies of this game are your fellow puppets, driven mad by the mysterious puppet frenzy, which seems to have made every puppet in the city go on a murderous rampage, with the sole exception seeming to be you and this random butler guy in the hotel. Speaking of, there's a hotel in the middle of all this murderous nonsense, and despite being a former mental asylum, it holds the most sane people left in this world. We've got the old lady hotel owner who's suffering from the petrification disease, which does exactly what it sounds like, and this engineer over here, who I like significantly more because she gave me a robotic grapple hook arm. Also this lady, who says mysterious cryptic things and lets us level up, which, for the record, is not a system I am currently capable of explaining to you. I know the purpose of the obvious stats, like health, stamina, and carry weight, but then there are these three, which all seem like forms of attack? I honestly have no idea what the difference is, but instead of experimenting with it, or, just Googling it, I, dumped all my stats into motivity. Like, all of them. This is my stat spread at the end of the game. I know it's bad, but I want big numbers, and as far as I'm aware, this made the numbers go up. As for who I'll be using my buffed up attacks on, that would be more angry robot puppets in the next zone. Our creator Geppetto is somewhere in this district, so we're gonna wade our way through the sea of mechanical murder machines to find him. The speedy little dogs from every Souls game are here and are just as annoying as they always are. I get introduced to the concept of climbing up ladders and the concept of falling off of ladders, and even larger puppets whose weapons are ripe and ready for stealing. A short break from the generally lifeless denizens of this area can be found in the three people who ended up sticking around. We've got a creepy shopkeeper who just chills in this abandoned house, a petrified lady who wants to be reunited with her baby, and this man with a donkey mask who is significantly less friendly than the other two. Fortunately, his massive weapon is very breakable, and the fight gets a lot more manageable when his weapon isn't 6'2". Given the donkey man is currently no longer able to harass Geppetto, he exits the carriage, calls us his son, which is a little strange, but I guess he did create us, and then hands us the Enigma assembly tool, which is objectively the funniest part of this entire game. The item description claims it's the result of doing away with common sense, and I'd say that's a pretty accurate description given what it lets you do with your weapons. Your weapons can now be broken apart into handle blade pairs and reassembled in any way you can imagine, as long as your imagination is limited to one handle and one blade. Want to put a greatsword blade on the police handle and swing it around like a club? By all means, go ahead. Want to put a club head on a greatsword handle and swing it around like something 2 times its weight and size? Yeah, you could do that too, but the first option is going to be significantly more effective for beating up the massive malfunctioning police mascot that, surprisingly, wasn't too successful with the general public. It is successful, however, at dismantling poor little Pinocchio here, and despite the newfound power in my one-handed greatsword, he still has something that I struggled to counter. An unblockable, undodgeable attack. Yes, you heard me right. You can't block, you can't dodge, you just get hit. Or you could technically parry it, or, dodge it. Those are boring, and my preferred strategy was hitting it hard enough that the enemy would be too busy falling over to complete the strike. A solid 4 tries later, and the mascot was down, and after giving a robot baby to the one petrified woman who's entirely convinced that it's her own flesh and blood, I returned to the hotel to figure out my next move. I did all the standard stuff that normal people do, got a new robot arm, upgraded the most important stat, tried to pet an angry cat, and watched the record spin in circles for an entire song because it makes my springs react. But most importantly, Geppetto, who we saved earlier, has rigged up this machine here that lets us upgrade our P organ, and you all know what that P stands for. The upgrades include Puppet. It stands for puppet organ because you're a... Anyways, it's basically just a skill tree that lets you get points by defeating bosses and solving puzzles around the world. It's got stuff like more heal usages and various kinds of damage increases, but none of the buffs are that game-changing, so I'm not gonna bring it up again. Also, if I talk about the P organ too much, YouTube might start looking at me weirdly. Anyways, Geppetto's given us our next mission, so we're off to save some guy named Vanini from the factory where all the puppets are being made, which is decidedly a horrible place to be when the puppets are all on murder mode. On the way, we beat up a few more puppets, say hi to Arlecchino, the king of riddles, who's just like that one guy in elementary school who goes around telling jokes he read off the internet, except they're all multiple choice and incredibly obvious. He gives us a key as a reward, guess it fell out of the telephone or something, and makes our springs react, which is probably a good thing. Maybe. Going into the puppet factory, though, we find the puppet of the future, who doesn't fit his name at all, given how he's programmed without the ability to aim. He does, however, guard my favorite weapon in the entire game, although my desire to rip the blade off of everything I find and stick it on the police baton handle has stopped me from realizing that quite yet. The enemies in this area start getting a little more difficult with these shield guys who could frankly just be the boss of the whole area, and another guy in an animal hat who seems a little upset about being trapped in a murder puppet-filled apocalypse, but we help him out with that. The animal mask guys, known as Stalkers, are scattered about the world, and with very few exceptions are all gonna try and kill me, given the whole being a puppet thing. Speaking of those exceptions, we find 2 more Stalkers who seem to be siblings, but even though they didn't instantly try to end my life, the whole based off Pinocchio thing is encouraging me to maybe not trust the person dressed as a fox. A couple more interesting things in this area. We open a door with the key we got from Arlecchino and grab those clothes that are in every piece of promotional material for this game. Find the person we're looking for just kind of hiding because they really shouldn't be here, and a funny little fire dagger that looks really cool but also took forever to kill anything with. Adding the poor damage output to a final boss that doesn't look like it cares too much about being burned, and I had to swap weapons. To, the best weapon in the game. Objectively, and mostly because of this dash forward charge attack. It does enough damage to one-shot most of the random enemies around the area, enough to stun the enemies that don't, and it's incredibly easy to land because you get to dash 500 miles whenever you use it. After swapping, it took me 5 more tries and many charge attacks to beat the enemy, but with the puppet factory now cleared of puppets, it was time to return to the hotel. This hotel visit is where I finalized my loadout for what would pretty much be the rest of the game. Boost lance handle for the dash, this big wrench head for crazy amounts of damage with this insane charge attack that's going to carry me through the rest of the game, and a new flamethrower arm that doesn't deal that much damage but will be super important later. Add that on to our new gift from Vanini that lets us sharpen our wrench so much it catches on fire, and my offense is complete. The next area will test it to its limits though, as after dealing with another angry stalker who won't stop screaming about how they don't want to see any more death while actively killing me, we reach the church, where the crazed puppets are replaced by crazed zombies. They aren't the most dangerous enemies, and the flamethrower deals with them nicely, but not all of them are your standard shambling undead. Granted, our new armored charge attack can absolutely destroy most of them, but yeah, they get a little bigger. To help out with our localized zombie apocalypse problem, we get a new friend in the form of this definitely not an alchemist who gives us a magic box that restores our health, but does not seem to refresh at checkpoints, so you're not going to see me using it too much. Actually, you're not going to see me doing much of anything for this next chunk because it is where I met my first roadblock. At first, I didn't think it was too bad, my deaths were objectively my fault, but that was before the game decided it was rafters time. This area is filled with projectile-throwing zombies who, even if you parry them, can still knock you to your death, and are incredibly annoying to deal with given their precarious positioning and my relative lack of projectiles. Well, okay, I have a few, but I'm saving them all to use on this little guy because I think it's funny, and to keep track of how many times I have to run through this area. 13 remaining, knocked off the edge. 11 remaining, died a surprise electricity ball. 8 remaining, knocked off again. 5 remaining, died to a clunky platforming. 4 remaining, knocked off the edge again. 3 remaining, died to the mini-boss the devs put at the end of all of this because they hate you. 2 remaining, fall off a ledge. 1 remaining, fall off a ledge. 0 remaining, died to the mini-boss again. I have no idea how many tries this took me, and I had to go to bed halfway through it, but after significantly too many attempts, I was past this little mini-nightmare and onto a significantly uglier one. This massive undead monster thing is the final boss of the area, and is honestly way easier than the last section I just dealt with. The attacks are fairly slow and incredibly telegraphed, but what you'll quickly realize is that the true enemy of this fight is the camera. Many of the Souls games struggle to position your point of view in a good spot whenever your enemies get too large, and Lies of P is no different. You can get pinned against a wall trying to block attacks you can't even see because the camera is completely filled with the boss's massive undead corpse. Camera aside though, it's a great boss fight, even if this specific unblockable attack is a bit of a pain. It's also the first fight to have a second phase, where he starts screaming and declaring himself a one-winged angel, but despite the addition of even more unblockable undodgeable attacks that make your camera do backflips, it couldn't stand for long against the funny spear wrench and its ability to take out an entire 1/6 of the boss's health in a single hit. Boss defeated and the first chunk of the game completed, the lore starts kicking in, and I get to watch this nice little cutscene where the blue lore dust floats out of the thing I just killed, and a man chuckles ominously while firing a blue lore laser on the top of his massive tower, but I'm too busy telling one of the few friendly NPCs I found to go to the definitely non-puppet-filled factory to pay attention to whatever story is being told here. This probably also happened in Pinocchio, I'll just watch one of the infinite adaptations that thing has, I'm sure I'll understand. The next area we've set our eyes on is one Geppetto says is full of innocent civilians that we need to save from the nefarious Black Rabbit Brotherhood, but given the massive mutant zombie thing at the gate, I'm thinking there aren't that many people left to save. One incredibly satisfying wrench whack later, and we're in, and contrary to my expectations, we do find some living beings here. The fox and cat from earlier are back and offer me some much needed assistance with the whole neighborhood is full of zombies problem. Unfortunately, their help lasts for roughly 1 minute, after which they leave me to deal with this massive thing all on my own. A bit of fancy movement, a whole lot of green zombie guts, and another conversation with Arlecchino later, though, and I've moved on to face the Black Rabbit Brotherhood themselves. And look, they've already got a nice little coffin prepared for me. How considerate. This fight is easily one of my favorites, even if the whole 4-on-1 idea isn't fully realized. The real boss is this massive guy with his massive sword that relentlessly tries to take your head off, and unfortunately he knows what he's doing. The other 3 members will pop in at set points in the fight and offer assistance, but they'll all retreat after only taking a few hits. They do chime in constantly throughout the fight though, and even if their comments don't always make the most sense, it adds nice background entertainment to the fight. The 4 siblings will attack in very different styles, with the first running you down with twin blades, the second doing crazy charges and vaults into the sky, and the third using a really annoying grapple to pull me into all sorts of danger. This fight doesn't escape the classic camera problem, but the way it does it, it almost feels intentional, with individual members abruptly swapping sides, putting the real threat completely off screen until it's too late. Speaking of, even the biggest brother alone could be a really satisfying fight. His wild swings are just as threatening as they look, but are also just the right level of intuitive, leading to really engaging parry strings. Said parries are super valuable to land as well, as the boss's weapon is super breakable, which makes the fight much easier. One very dead older brother later, and the rest of the Brotherhood left me to do whatever I wanted, which happened to be looting their entire base. All the way in the back, I discovered a secret passage that led right to the hotel, which is just a tad concerning, but more importantly, there's a magic wizard tree here. Our definitely not an alchemist friend from earlier really wants the fruit to heal him, but we're the only one that can pick it, and for whatever reason, the tree fruit grows in real time, which means... Okay, actually, never mind. All it gives you for it are different ways to use the cube, and aside from the wording being on the buff being very confusing, I'm not too big on using limited consumables anyways, so I just grabbed a few fruits and left. I went back through some old areas and found this portrait of Geppetto's son, who is literally just me but younger, which is a little strange, but more importantly, I've reconnected with the one guy I sent to the factory. He's a little angry at me for setting him to a death trap, but he still agrees to sell me stuff anyways. He'll give me 1 unique weapon or amulet to buff your character per major boss defeated, and the weapon he offers for beating the massive zombie boss earlier is too tempting to pass up, meaning we're leaving the wrench behind. After another failed attempt to pet a cat, I head off to a neighborhood that, while significantly more friendly looking, is filled with just as many enemies. We're back to dealing with puppets now, which I thought was going to be easier than the undead, but they've now armed themselves with guns, and surprise surprise, that makes for a more difficult fight. I do have my own gun in the form of another arm I acquired, but it's, not the greatest, and nowhere close to the flamethrower in terms of usefulness, although I'll get to that later. Another stalker lady shows up, screaming about how I killed their sister Adeline, which is a little unfair given I have no clue who that even is, and stumble upon another lovely little roadblock. This time, the roadblock is clown-shaped, but despite his balloony appearance, he hits harder than a truck and laughs at you the entire time. The area he's in is filled with these horse guys who throw bombs at you, and these lovely little reverse firefighters who I desperately wish were worse at their job, and if you don't deal with them properly before the clown arrives, you'll have an experience that directly opposes the one a clown is supposed to bring. It took 12 consecutive deaths to this thing before I realized the new weapon I was using simply wasn't cutting it, and swapped back to the wrench, with which I beat it first try. So, never unequipping this thing again. Past the puppet, we find a beautiful mansion filled with less than beautiful singing spider puppets, and that one Adeline person I was accused of killing earlier. Which means this was, completely unjustified, for the record. But to make up for maybe kind of murdering this girl's sister, I hand her an apple, and she tells me how it was Arlecchino the Riddle guy who told her to go here because it was safe. Which is incredibly mean, and is something I would never even think of doing to someone. Ever. Anyways, one very poorly designed room later, and I've reached a surprisingly well-put-together theater, where I get to see a funny little play where a robot that looks an awful lot like me gets its pee organ ripped out by Geppetto, who places it in a puppet who, if I'm following, is actually me, and the one that looks like me represents the person I'm based off of, probably Geppetto's son, although that would mean he potentially killed his son? But before I have time to digest, a massive puppet falls out of the sky and offers a handshake. Apparently not currently in the mood for friendly discussions of the fine arts, we very aggressively reject his offer, and he responds by very aggressively using the power of a tornado to tear us to pieces. This fight is insane. Yeah, the other fights could be described that way too. A giant lightning-charged puppet mascot or zombie Bishop Sephiroth wannabe are both really out there, but this fight is the first in which the insanity spreads to the combat itself. The 2 fights I just mentioned generally limited themselves to different swipes and slams with their various appendages, but the King of Puppets throws that out the window. He'll chase you down with a flurry of slashes with his saw-blade hands, turn his hands and shoulders and face into guns to shoot glowing blue explosives all around him, and spin so fast he causes a massive tornado that destroys all the furniture in the room, and also you. He does still utilize the standard swipes you see in other fights, but his are augmented by the extra pair of inflatable industrial-strength tubes he's attached to himself, and the horrible electric murder claws he's put on the ends of those. Parrying all of his attacks is incredibly difficult, but it is completely required given the amount of unblockables he uses. I'll admit, at this point, I was starting to feel the effects of not putting any investment into my health or defense, but being able to evaporate a quarter of the boss's health bar in a single hit is probably worth it. The robot down and destroyed, we discovered that it wasn't a puppet, but a massive mech piloted by someone who looks kind of like us, but blonder and taller and with a much cooler weapon. Also, he's faster, way faster. It's incredibly difficult to keep up with his attacks, and even once you die, he won't rest, zooming all over the screen with his little roller skate feet. He had even more health than the first phase, although not by much, and consistently cut me down in a single combo without giving me time to react. I have no complaints though, the fight was a visual feast to experience, even if my inability to keep up led to those feasts being roughly 10 seconds long. Despite their speed, every attack he used felt reactable and fair. Well, except for this one, where he sets a sword on fire and pretends to be a Beyblade. This one is absolute nonsense, and the one singular time that I ever survived it, I died right after because I had almost no health left. When I did finally clear the fight, it was more due to the upsettingly efficient damage output of my weapon, effectively skipping over this attack, which is supposed to happen roughly halfway through the fight, but hey, a win is a win, so it's time to move on. Oh, quick lore break actually. The King of Puppets says a lot during his fight, and the dialogue is actually rather important, but the combination of the distorted text and the robot trying to actively stab their pointy bitch through my chest made it a little hard to read, so I missed pretty much all of it on my playthrough. Gist is, he doesn't want to fight you and is 100% down with taking down all the monsters, murdering everything, but he has no choice to kill you since you're trying to do the same to him. This instance of friendly characters dying because of your actions will definitely not continue though. This is an entirely self-contained instance that I can assure you will not repeat later. Speaking of later, it is time for me to head back to the hotel. This butler guy, who's behaved as a soulless robotic vendor until now, has awoken his ego, which I guess just means he's got feelings and thoughts and pretty much everything that a human has, which has several implications for the lore of the puppets. But for now, the important part is that he's in love with the old lady who owns the hotel, which is a bit of an unfortunate realization to have at this time, as she's very much so about to die. Being completely unable to help in this situation, I'd simply leave to go beat up more puppets like Geppetto wants us to, although the way he calls us son in like every single sentence feels a bit more ominous given what we just saw. The newest round of puppet-flavored destruction is a bit of a mood killer, though, as all the puppets seem kinda depressed. I mean, we did just kill their king, so it is justified, but their grief is enough to halt their murderous rage, so my war against my entire species continues. Wait, why are we killing puppets again? Oh, right, murder rampage, horses with bombs, stupid shield guys up in the rafters. Yeah, this is completely deserved. Add the zombies back into the mix, and we've got an amazing new area to explore, filled with brand new things to see and experience, like this zombie that tried to suck my brain out, this clown that thankfully stayed within his case, and an angry scuba diver / wrestler that could have been the final boss of the area all on his own. He's got dropkicks, he's got grabs, he's got punches so strong they crack the concrete, but the title of strongest enemy doesn't go to him. No, that honor goes to the bigger, buffer, even more drug-filled strongman 2 rooms away. His punches are greater, his command grabs more frequent and much, much more deadly, and he possesses an unblockable filled arsenal finely tuned for destruction. Of me, specifically, but even more surprising is the second phase, where he injects all of the drugs into all of his veins and becomes weaker, actually. Like, look at the recovery on these attacks. His second phase is actually a ton easier, and I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe he's supposed to do more damage or something, but pretty much everything one-shots me already for reasons entirely outside of my control, so I didn't notice. Don't do drugs, I guess. Several solid wrench whacks later, and the monster was down, but a new monster showed up to take his place. Simon over here isn't as crazy buff as the last guy, yet, but he is responsible for much more destruction. Like, all of the destruction in the entire game. This is the guy behind the whole petrification disease thing that's killing everyone, and he's using it to achieve the next step in human evolution, or become God, or both, I'm not really sure. But it's now our mission to stop him. First on our list of anti-Simon measures is dealing with the petrification disease, which we've now figured out how to do with help from the fruit from that one golden tree that's been right next to our hotel the entire time without anyone noticing. We give the cure to the hotel owner, as well as the fox-cat duo over here, because despite their not-so-honest actions earlier, they're at least not trying to kill me, so I might as well stay on good terms. The next area we travel to functions as a special showcase of all the ways Lies of P tries to kill you without the use of standard enemies. There are bear traps everywhere that I'm too blind to see, but apparently puppets are deaf, so that's not too much of a problem. The giant cannon that fires on me every moment I so much as breathe in the zone, however, is a massive problem, as are the burning rocks rolling down this series of slopes, as are the massive earthquakes that I'm going to blame on Simon because he seems like the kind of guy who would casually cause natural disasters for science. Not everything is bad here, though. The one treasure hunter guy showed back up and told us there's, treasure to be found here past a giant evil swamp monster. It's so nice that even in the most dangerous of areas, this game will make sure you've got a friend nearby. Anyways, look at this cool thing I found out. That sure is funny and has nothing to do with any future events at all. So yeah, Swamp Monster, this thing is easily the most dangerous enemy so far. It has a pair of strange tendrils it uses to attack you no matter where you are in the arena, plenty of slam attacks that nearly one-shot me, and the ability to do a true-to-life impression of a very angry mole. Add on a second phase, where the monster squeezes its way into a massive puppet shell that I guess it just happened to have lying around, and I hope you can start to see why this took me significantly too many tries. However, the repetition of seeing the same attacks over and over and over again was a prime opportunity for experimentation, and I was not disappointed by what I found. Introducing a brand new piece of tech that I discovered through sheer boredom, flame canceling. Now, it's a commonly known fact that you can skip the end of your attack animations with a dodge. It's incredibly helpful when it comes to getting out of the way, but can end up taking a fair bit of stamina if you use it too much. If dodging isn't your style, you can also cancel your end frames with a guard, but just like the dodge, the option isn't available if you don't have any stamina, a common occurrence for me given my addiction to charge attacks and aversion to increasing my stamina cap. This is where your funny little flamethrower arm comes in. This thing can cancel your attacks stamina free, instantly letting you reposition and dealing a bit of damage in the process. While I am aware this has incredibly niche uses and does next to no damage, I swear it helped me out a lot with this fight, and honestly, even if it wasn't the reason I was able to clear it, I just think it's neat that I'd gotten used enough to this game's systems to figure something like this out. Continuing the good news, the cure we gave the old lady worked, as she seems to be doing much better, and the next objective is back in the first area of the game, meaning I'll probably get a bit of a break from the constant losses I've been experiencing for the last 2 hours. And by probably, I mean definitely not, because the area is now filled with these horrible scorpion monster things that wish me, my descendants, and everyone I've so much as made eye contact with on the street a horrible, horrible death. Add that on to the rest of the zombie horde that has decided falling out of the sky would be a great new pastime, as well as the brand new 6'13" sword cane wielding alchemists, and I think it's finally time for a weapon change. That's right, no more dash attacking fire wrench, it's time to channel the power of the thunder god and smite people with a taser hammer. No, yeah, I'm serious this time, the weapon change is for real. This one's got a crazy slam attack I don't have to charge up that completely invalidates this mini-boss's clone gimmick and still boasts fairly low recovery on its moves. Even against the boss of the area, this thing worked wonders, taking a surprisingly low number of tries to beat. This was definitely due to the hammer, and not the fact that this is just a buffed up version of the first fight in the game. Nah, it's all the hammer. The hammer makes all the good things happen. Practically a good luck charm. Anyways, the hotel's been trashed, Geppetto's been kidnapped, and it's like 90% the Hound Guy's fault. Who could have seen this coming? Also, my hair is long now, which is frankly even worse than all those other things, but it means I'm becoming more human, I guess, probably as a result of all those records I watched spin in circles for hours at a time like a real person would. The next area is through another secret passage, because this hotel is apparently connected to literally every single place of any importance, and we very quickly run back into the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, but, -1 because of our last encounter. That doesn't make this fight any easier, though, as I now have to deal with all three at once, and they have roughly 10 times more health than they had before. They all take turns beating you up, with the primary attacker imbuing their weapon with either fire, lightning, or evil corruption poison stuff, and getting in your face while the other two pepper you with annoying projectiles. Opposite of last time, the little girl is actually the most threatening of the three, due entirely to the debuff she applies to you. This poison does the classic poison thing of draining your health, but also reduces your sharpness, which is a game mechanic I have completely ignored up until now because it hasn't been important. As you hit things, your sharpness goes down, Monster Hunter style, and just like those games, a dull weapon is liable to bounce off your target. Generally, you can just sharpen your weapon to avoid this fate, but the three Brotherhood members hardly give you a single break to do so, meaning my sharpness got dangerously low a good few times. Oh, sorry, did I say 3? I meant 4, because the biggest brother is back from the dead, now armed with magic force powers. He is much, much stronger than before, courtesy of the evil alchemist people, and has a whole new suite of ways to kill me, chief among which is his brand new ability to fake being stunned. This is objectively cheating, but still comes nowhere close to as annoying as the poison, which on my final attempt completely broke my weapon, rendering it useless for the rest of the fight. Which means, after the most stressful menuing of my life, that we're back to the wrench. For good, this time, although that's not saying much, as there are only 3 major bosses left in this game. Yep, we're nearing the very end, so after proving that Alidoro is a liar even when he thinks he's telling the truth, and beaching an entire submarine for what is, as far as I can tell, absolutely no reason, we're on to the final area. And you can tell it's the final area because every corner is an enemy waiting behind it ready to knock you off a cliff. I quickly pass a desert full of lore things, and slowly pass a door guardian who is very good at his job, and make my way inside. Things aren't much better inside, as the tower is full of these massive insta-kill wall traps that I hate very much, but I'm not the only one suffering here. Arlecchino, the one riddle guy from the telephone, has been here the whole time, just chilling with a spear lodged in what little remains of his chest. He talks about how much he loves murdering things, calls me a real boy, and hands me a new pair of clothes for some reason, and then disappears for the rest of the game. Speaking of character resolutions, the black cat guy showed up again without his fox friend, and despite being located in the most obvious boss room ever, simply lets me pass after I give him some more of the petrification cure. One not-so-quick elevator ride with a not-so-friendly fellow passenger later, and I've reached the actual boss arena. This fight may be 3 away from the true final boss, but for my money, this is unquestionably the hardest. Just look at the footage in front of you. This metal-covered maniac uses their weapon to the fullest, going after you with relentless flurries of bone-crushing attacks with hardly a second to breathe in between. You can't just block these either, as their damage is so high that failure to time a parry can result in you losing a massive chunk of your health. This fight took try after try after try, and even once I'd memorized every pattern and ingrained every last parry into my muscle memory, I still had to deal with the second phase, where they ditched the armor and do a much better impression of Thor than me and my useless hammer could have ever hoped for. This phase requires split-second reactions, flawless defense, and proficiency in that one minigame from Legend of Zelda to take down, and despite my obsession with the masterpiece that is Wind Waker, this fight took more tries than any other by far. Almost every strike was strong enough to end an attempt on its own, and hardly any of them were on their own. Opportunities to attack back were few and far between, but despite all the failed attempts, this fight has firmly earned its spot as my favorite in the game. Its combination of flashy, over-the-top attacks with a methodical precision that is oh so satisfying to parry strikes the exact balance of difficulty and presentation that I look for in games like this. It did, however, highlight the failures of the next boss, but before that, I finish off this fantastic fight with a decidedly less than fantastic final blow and start doing that thing that happens at the end of stories where everyone starts dying. First on the list is the blue-haired fairy godmother lady. She is having problems and asks us to ever so kindly solve them through the power of murder, which we agree to, letting them dissolve into a bunch of butterflies. Back at the hotel, the old lady, who had supposedly been cured, has died to organ failure, and the butler, not willing to go on in a world without her, deletes his memories, meaning he's pretty much dead too. Our train of death continues when we meet back up with the fox lady for a final time, and despite being completely chill with her brother and 100% willing to go grab her some more of the cure, I don't happen to have any in my pockets when I find her, so she decides it's her responsibility to kill the puppet who just defeated the most heavily armored lightning-wielding maniac you've ever seen, which is, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, a horrible decision. So yeah, out of the list of 11 notable, somewhat friendly characters in this game, over half of them have died, and the game isn't even done yet. At least I can still pet the hotel cat. This is how you do it, yeah? I don't own a cat, I don't know. Anyways, enough awkward cat holding, it's time to finally deal with Simon, who is having a time up on top of his tower. I'm not gonna lie, for the big bad of the entire game, I don't feel threatened at all by this misshapen man thing with an oddly shaped stick. It wasn't just his design either, his moveset was surprisingly weak too, with his attacks being far weaker than the last bosses, and that's if they even hit you. They're all slow and obviously telegraphed, and occasionally he'll just jump to the other side of the arena before attacking, meaning he doesn't even come close to being a threat. The second phase does help with the difficulty a bit. Using the power of science to become God gives him the ability to shoot little blasts of light at me and blow up half the arena with a giant hand, but while they are quite visually impressive, these new attacks pose very little threat gameplay-wise, only requiring some simple running to avoid. This whole encounter is honestly disappointing as a climax to the story. If you replace the difficulty of this fight in the last one, Simon would have much more of the fear-inspiring power that you would expect from a literal god, but as it is now, this fight serves as a frankly underwhelming capstone to an otherwise fantastic game. I mean, well, it's not completely over yet. There is one more villain to deal with. Simon may have been behind all the zombies and evil scuba divers, but all the puppets going crazy? Only one person was capable of something like that, and it was their maker, Geppetto, your father. But he doesn't see it that way. Despite calling you his son throughout the game, he doesn't see you as anything but a lifeless husk that contains the life essence of his deceased son Carlo, complete with a dead child's likeness. Our good little Pinocchio has started going through his rebellious phase though, and decides that he doesn't feel like joining the majority of the cast in the afterlife, instead opting to send Geppetto there instead. Geppetto, not a particular fan of this idea, responds by sending the true final boss after you, the nameless puppet. This thing is also easier than the lightning lady from before. Not easy, mind you, this fight does still offer the standard Souls challenge you'd expect from a final boss. It pulls out all the stops, introducing borderline unfair attacks into the mix, like spear thrusts that shoot surprise lasers if they miss, dash attacks that will stun you if you try to block them, and an unblockable that you have no way of predicting the parry timing for on your first time seeing it. Add in the red mist that makes attacks difficult to follow, and the constant swapping of the boss's weapon, and you might be wondering why I seem disappointed with the difficulty of this fight. The answer, plain and simple, is the health bar. Now, yeah, this is entirely my fault, but it feels like the boss doesn't last long enough to put up a real challenge. Just look at this damage. I stunned the first phase with an entire half of its bar left, and I've completely emptied it before it gets a single chance to respond. Don't get me wrong though, unlike Simon, I do think this is a good final boss. For its short duration, the combat is quite difficult. The puppet moves erratically and quickly with plenty of the damage the malformed alchemist lacked. It's also fairly satisfying from a story perspective. The final blow is only made possible because Geppetto, the one who sicked it on you, blocks a lethal strike to protect the soul of his son within you, adding one final member to our list of dead quote-unquote friends. There are more endings to this game, different choices you can make, side quests to undertake, and a whole load of challenges you can try, but as far as I'm concerned, the credits have started rolling, so my time here is over. This has already somehow become my longest script ever, which was not the plan when I started this, but I guess I just had a lot to say. I mean, I enjoyed the game a lot, so I'm not too surprised. I definitely don't regret spending my time on this video, even if it's probably not coming out on the 23rd like I planned. But yeah, that's it for the video. Quick plug for the Discord, linked in the description, that had way more people joined than I expected, and thanks for 2k subs. It's way more than I ever expected, but I'll try to keep putting out content I feel is worthy of it. Appreciate it, seriously. See you in the next one.